I hope everyone can hear me. And thank you very much for those kind words. I just love what I do, and I love being part of Rand Barbet's. I was there nearly right from the beginning. So I feel very privileged to be part of the club. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience at the beginning of the year, where I went on a trip that I wanted to do forever, but very few ships do it, and there's normally only about 2 trips a year. And I was asked to join this particular trip as the assistant expedition leader, and it was around the back end of Antarctica. It was the part of Antarctica that's very seldom visited, and that's around the Ross Sea. So a 32-day trip ended up being a whole lot longer because I was then stuck on the ship during lockdown. So this is really going to be the story of my trip earlier on this year. And it was an amazing experience. I don't know that I want to repeat all of it, but it certainly was something that I will never forget. And I literally covered the entire globe in 80 days. So, it's done it to me again. I'll have to do this slowly. Can you see my pointer? Anyone?
Yes.
All right.
We can. Thanks.
Yes, good.
We can.
So we started in New Zealand, in the southern part of New Zealand, in a place called Bluff. And we were going to, or we did, travel all the way south to Antarctica and round on that side. And this is going to drive me nuts, but anyway. And this was our master plan. So we were starting in Invercargill, and we were going to do a couple of the New Zealand subantarctic islands. We were meant to go to Macquarie Island, but then it was closed because they took away the permission because they were doing some renovations. And we went across to Bellany Islands, into the Ross Sea, all the way around the Amundsen Sea, the Bellinghausen Sea, Peter I Island, doing some stops on the Antarctic Peninsula, and then finishing our journey in Ushuaia. So that was a 32-day trip, all in one go. We had 94 guests and 3 helicopters because some of the places that we needed to go to required helicopters. We were in a little ice-strengthened expedition ship, so we could push through the ice, and that allows us to go to these areas. The first port of call was the Auckland and Enderby Islands. So that's the Auckland Island there, and Enderby Island is just right next to it. So we had a day at sea to get there, and along the way, we had some amazing seabirds. Now, once we were down in the subantarctic islands, we were in part of the southern oceans, and the southern oceans are actually the worst in the world, and there's a good reason for it. It's because you've got this huge circumpolar current that's going round the Antarctic continent, and absolutely nothing is in the way to slow these waves down. So a small wave will just pick up speed and height, and this is wonderful if you want to see your albatrosses and petrels and prions. So on our way down, we had fantastic views of our southern royal albatross, one of your giant albatrosses, your great albatrosses, with a wingspan of about nearly 3.5 meters. So I can't pace out 3.5 meters in front of you, but stick your arms out and double that, and you're getting close to the wingspan of your southern royal albatross. Quite a magnificent bird, just hanging behind the ship. We, unfortunately, and once again, this is the Southern Ocean, we had some bad weather. And this is a theme that goes through the whole story is we we just had bad weather. Anyway, first day at sea, we had really quite crummy weather. We had about 8-meter waves, pretty strong winds. We were bashing into the waves, but fortunately, it was soon to end because we reached the Enderby Island, which was our first stop. Now, when I've been to Enderby Island before, we've had some pretty swelly conditions, but we managed to land. This time we didn't. However, on our approach, we ended up with my favorite albatross of all time. And this is the light-mantled sooty albatross. And he's a small little albatross with, and really in terms of coloring, he doesn't have a lot of coloring, but he's got this incredible shade of brown, from a dark chocolate brown, almost black, to this very pale light color. So with this beautiful white half moon around the eye and the white along the center of the bill, he is truly just a beautiful bird, and certainly one that we get very excited when we see. So on our approach, we saw one of these, and I was super excited because later on, while we didn't manage to land at Enderby Island because it was too rough, because this big system had gone through, we jumped in our little Zodiacs, our rubber ducks, and we did a bit of a Zodiac cruise. And what did we come up to? But guess what this is? It's a light mantle sooty albatross chick, sitting there in the nest all by himself, waiting for mom and dad to come and feed him. You might have to wait quite a few days for them to come back and bring food. Now, your albatrosses don't bring food and regurgitate it like most birds that we know. So they pre-digest the food, and then when they get when they get back to the nest, they regurgitate a very highly calorific oil or oily substance that the chick eats. So it means that the adult can go out on a feeding trip of many days, up to a couple of weeks, and then when he comes back, the adults who are looking after the chick will swap over. When the chick gets to about this size, both adults will go out and feed, because obviously the nutritional needs of the chick when they get to the side is much bigger, and also he can fight off any potential predators. Now, Enderby Island is also one of the few places where we find the yellow-eyed penguin, and it's a super rare penguin. We were very lucky to see. This one was coming in while we were on our approach to Enderby, and on our Zodiac cruise, we saw a juvenile. So you can see it doesn't have that broad yellow stripe above the eye yet, and his eye color isn't quite right, but it's quite strange to see penguins. I suppose the African penguin is similar, but to see penguins in the equivalent of like a fynbos. So they nest in the bushes. They don't nest in burrows like the African penguin. So they find their way into the bushes. And actually, when they're deep in the bush, you almost can't see them. So we were thrilled to be able to get sightings of this very rare penguin. We then headed down from Enderby Island to the southern part of Auckland Island, and we went to a place which was sort of an inlet, and none of us had ever been there before. We thought, well, let's see what we can see. So we dropped the Zodiacs and we went on a Zodiac cruise, and it was actually amazing. We found some areas in the rocks that had been hollowed away, and we managed to take the Zodiacs right into these big arches. And I decided to go out of the protected water and round the side, and we came across a colony of nesting shy albatross. Now, it was quite late in the afternoon, so the light was dimming down a bit, and we just had these albatrosses flying around our heads I was a bit nervous about looking up because they were they were sending down some poopy missiles, but they were obviously coming in to do a shift change to take over the looking after the eggs and the chicks. And they do this beautiful display. All of your albatrosses do. So the one albatross will come in to take over, and they will put their wings out, they'll spread their tail, they'll tap each other's bill, they'll squawk, they'll go, ah, ah, and that's all you're hearing all around you. And the whole side of the cliff was just full of these birds, changing the guard, with one coming in and the other one leaving, and the others flying around in circles above us. So it was quite a fantastic sight. But so after our day in the Auckland Islands, we headed down to Campbell Island, which is the first island to be declared rat-free. So you'll probably know that Gough Island, they're doing a whole rat and mouse eradication now. South Georgia, which is an amazing place, is now been declared rat-free. And Campbell Island was one of the first. So it's actually been amazing to see the changes that have taken place, because a lot of the species that previously, in fact, they thought were extinct, they have managed to find and have built up populations again. So this is what it looks like. Remember, we're now pretty far south. It rains or is misty and foggy most of the time. You've got this lush vegetation. And we take a walk through the vegetation on this little walkway right up to the top of the mountain. It's quite steep. And we get to a colony of nesting southern royal albatrosses. So say these are the ones with these incredibly long wingspans. And initially we couldn't see anything because the mist was so dense and way down the mountain. And as we stood there for a little bit, so the mist sort of opened up and we got a chance to see these birds sitting on the nest. It's such a beautiful area. It really, really is. But even more exciting is on our approach again to Campbell Island, we had another albatross. And you'll see throughout this, we managed to tick off a whole lot of our albatrosses. And this is the Campbell Island albatross. So it really occurs mainly in and around the Campbell Island. It looks very much, for those of you who know the black-browed albatross, looks like a black-browed albatross, about the same size, 2.5 meter wingspan, but he's got this quite creepy looking pale eye. So we were quite chuffed to be able to see some of those as well. Here they are. You can see the weather's still pretty rocky. And then flying around Campbell Island, I had to spend quite a bit of time at the landing site, and the albatrosses were taking off just around the other side of the island and flying around right in front of me, so we could have a really good view. And you can see the black line along the center of the bill, the cutting edge of the beak, and that's that's your diagnostic characteristic of a royal albatross. So it's quite difficult to tell the difference between southern and northern royal albatross. So I'm not going to go into the differences here, but these were your southern royal albatrosses. Now, it was, for half of the time we were there, it was raining. And those of you who know me know that I really enjoy taking photos. And I was at the landing site, busy organizing for people to go back to the ship when they came down. And there was a little bit of time to hang out when there weren't any guests. And these two little silver eyes, which are the equivalent really of our white eyes, were sitting there in the rain and looking absolutely miserable. But it was so cute because they were literally huddling up next to each other. The one was almost, in a way, protecting the other and sort of preening him a little bit, or her. And you can, as I say, you could just see that they're just absolutely miserable, but we're dealing pretty well with the weather, actually. Then we have the New Zealand pipit, and this particular one is sort of a subspecies of the Auckland pipit. So it's a New Zealand pipit, the subspecies Auckland pipit, and then it's almost like a subspecies. So it's really a race of the Auckland pipit, and that's the Campbell Island pipit. And these were completely extinct from the rats and mice, but they recolonized the area by themselves. And they now believe that they are genetically different enough to be considered a race. Because there hasn't been any hunting on the island or anything like that, they're very, very confiding. And this photo I took, the bird was probably a couple of meters from me and just hopping around doing what he would ordinarily be doing. This, however, was really the highlight for us. And this is the Campbell Island teal. And it's the rarest duck in the world. They also thought that this duck was completely extinct. They hadn't seen any on Campbell Island. They had been decimated by the rodents, and they managed to clear out all the rodents by about 1993, when they found a small population, really a handful of birds, on a very tiny island close to Campbell Island. And they took a few of these birds and started to breed them in captivity, and then released them around Campbell Island. And from there, they have started to breed naturally, and there's now a few hundred breeding pairs. So it's really a fantastic, I suppose it's a fantastic megatick. If you, it's certainly one that you will have to go to that area to go and find. And they're very beautiful as well. You can see they're a flightless bird, so they paddle like mad, and it's quite a large duck with this beautiful iridescence. Here's another picture. You can see the green at the back of the head. Now, I'm always very wary of any of the eared seals. So these are the sea lions and the fur seals, because they tend to be very aggressive and they move very fast. So your eared seals can walk on pretty much all fours, a bit like a dog, and they can outrun you. Now, your hooker sea lion, which occurs in that area, the male, and this is one of the males, they get to about 800 kilograms, and they don't really care who you are. If you're in the way, they will. I've not seen any of them attack you, but they don't really care. So this guy came out from the one side, on the other side of our landing, and he came straight towards us. But we didn't have anywhere to go, so he's pushing us backwards and backwards and backwards. And eventually we ended up having to jump into the zodiacs that were tied up just to get out of his way. Fortunately, he then decided to get into the water, that he wasn't going to just sit on the landing, because we would have been a little bit stranded. But you certainly don't want to mess with these guys, because 800 kilos of blubbers, probably not the best way to go. Here's another one who was on the path. We managed to skirt around him, but you can see the males, when they in territorial mode, they will attack anything that gets pretty close. So after our time at Campbell Island, we then started to head south, and we had some fairly decent days at sea, a little bit foggy, but we ended up close. Well, our first view of the Bellany Islands is what you see here. It was very overcast. There was a long swell, quite misty and foggy. And this is an amazing place because we would have been the 33rd group of people ever to go to these islands. Just simply because they're so remote. Actually, not because they're particularly special, but because you have to be like actually a little bit nuts to get there in the first place. But it was on our way, and our first landing on the eastern side where we wanted to go, the weather was just too bad. Everything we do is so weather dependent, and while the weather didn't look that bad, when we took the Zodiacs out, the swell was about 2.5, maybe 3 meters. So when you're at the gangway and you're stepping into the Zodiac, and all of a sudden the Zodiac just goes down and goes down, and it goes below the poles that are there to prevent the Zodiac from going underneath the gangway, then we kind of have to call it off. So we didn't manage to get off on the side we wanted to, but that's okay, because we then went around the eastern side, the western side, which had a lot more protection. And we were actually in for a super treat because we got to see a whole lot of wildlife and scenery that was quite spectacular. So we didn't have quite the same swell. It was still quite foggy when we got there, but it did then start to clear up. And we had some magnificent icebergs, incredibly steep, rugged terrain. And so we took the Zodiacs out and we went to see what we could find. And there we found a king penguin, which was highly unusual. We didn't expect to see a king penguin there. And this is a juvenile. So he's kind of on a bit of a gap year. He probably hatched at Macquarie Island, which was still probably, I think, about 600 kilometers away. And he had stopped off there and was going through his annual molt. So penguins have to go through a catastrophic molt once a year. And that's when they push out all the old feathers with new feathers. And during that time, they're not able to go out to sea to feed. So they really just sit on land being absolutely miserable for a couple of weeks until the molt is done. This is also a place where we had lots of Weddell seals. Here's a huge big Weddell seal sitting next to the line, rather next to the king penguin. And this was our first and only opportunity to see chinstrap penguins. So they always remind me of like a little bobby on the beach with a beautiful chinstrap. So there was a small chinstrap colony and a little Adelie colony along the edge of the island as well. And here are Weddell seals. To me, they have the most gorgeous face. They look like, I don't know, like little dogs. But your Weddell seals are absolutely amazing. These guys, they live under the ice cap, under the frozen ice in the winter. But of course, they're mammals, so they need to breathe air. So the male will keep a breathing hole open. So he will chew around the edges to keep it open. And the females, of course, will come and use this breathing hole. And when they do, well, he'll grab them and he'll do what he wants to do with them. And the female will then pup around the same time the following year. So they have delayed implantation because their gestation is 9 months. So that fertilized egg will only implant in the uterus 3 months later. What makes these guys so amazing, though, is that they will eat mainly fish and squid, and they will dive down as deep as 700 meters to get their food. Now, if you think of a scuba diver will go down maybe 30 meters, 40 meters. Imagine going down to 700 meters. So they have really quite amazing adaptations to survive in these conditions. After having a look at the Bellany Islands, we went down to Cape Adare, and things were not with us because that's where we wanted to land. So not only was the beach full of large bergy bits of ice that had broken off icebergs, but we had the waves coming in onto the beach. So looking at those conditions, there was absolutely nothing that we could do to try and land there. However, we got a look from a distance at Borchgrevink's hut, and most people have never heard of him. But he's the first guy to land on the Antarctic continent and to overwinter there. So they built this hut, and there's a colony of about 25,000 Adelie penguins around the hut. So you can just imagine what the smell was like at that time. But it's a pretty remote and rugged place. So it's to not get to these areas is actually pretty normal. But of course, people are getting a little bit anxious now. They really wanted to get off and see Borchgrevink's hut. So we went around the corner into Robertson Bay, where we had a nice protected bay. The weather was, the skies were clearing up. And we thought that we would take a helicopter trip. So this was our first experience of the helicopters. And these pilots are incredible. We had Chilean pilots who have spent many, many years flying in Antarctica. And they took us almost like through the crevasses. It just, when you're going in helicopter, it's a completely different experience to when you're seeing things from a Zodiac or on land. So that was our first helicopter experience, which was quite remarkable. What I really love about going over glaciers by helicopter is one never really gets the idea of what these crevasses look like from a distance or from below. And here we had a chance to look right down into the cracks, and the blue that comes out is just this incredible, I can't quite describe it, but this incredible blue coming out from all of these cracks. Unfortunately, we had to leave, and we had a beautiful sunset going past some icebergs. And I don't know if you can see, but there's two little penguins sitting on this iceberg as we went past, as the sky was starting to turn orange. Now we had to move a little bit further, and our main point of the trip was to get into McMurdo Sound and to explore the McMurdo Sound area, because there's a lot to see. Now, this particular trip, we had 25 people from the Scott Polar Institute, or the Friends of the Scott Polar Institute. And that included Defila Scott, who is Robert Falcon Scott's granddaughter. And she wanted to go to Scott's hut, which I'll talk about, to see where her grandfather stayed just before his fated trip. So we got down to the McMurdo Sound around the 28th of February. I left South Africa on the 13th of February, joined the ship on the 16th, or rather the ship left on the 16th. And so we're now 2 weeks into the trip. We were very, very far south. And at this stage, we had lost internet connection. So we couldn't get any ice maps. We couldn't get any weather charts. We were very limited. We had no communication. If we absolutely needed to, we could correspond through Iridium with the office, but we were effectively cut off from the rest of the world. And this created quite an interesting experience, because we have this when we're very, very far north as well, is you don't have any connection. But this was the time when COVID was really starting to spread around the world. And we had no idea. We were merrily getting stuck in ice and doing icy things, while the rest of the world was was starting to panic. As we came into McMurdo Sound, we were having, the sun was setting, and we had the most beautiful sunset over, well, sunset was sort of on the other side, but beautiful glow over Mount Erebus. It was also quite a magical experience. Now, we were trying to find, there were a couple of places we wanted to go into in the McMurdo Sound, and apart from Scott's Hut, the super big tick of what to do when you're there is to go to the dry valleys. Now, very, very, very few people ever get to the dry valleys. It's a specially protected area. You need special permits to go there. You're limited in certain areas that you can go. And the dry valleys are one of the driest places on earth. So the Atacama Desert is probably the only place that's drier than the dry valleys. It has no precipitation. Now, the Antarctic is very, very cold, and it's got a lot of sinking air, so you don't actually get much precipitation. Here, basically anything just gets blown away. So what happens is 2 days before we get there, they have snow. So we're expecting to go to the dry valleys and see these dry valleys and deserts, and we find that actually it's covered in snow, and the snow was about ankle deep. And we went back through the years of satellite imagery, and we couldn't find one year when there was any snow whatsoever. Now you can see already we're starting to hit some pack ice. There's our little ship. You can see the helicopter landing pad. There's the helicopters. I think there were already 2 helicopters there, or maybe just one, I can't remember. I was circling the ship at that time. And this is what the dry valleys look like. And they shouldn't look like this, but they did, because there had been the snow, which was just quite remarkable. However, there you go. That gives you a bit of a view. Very rocky, not so much sandy soil, but as a very, very rocky soil. And this is the place where we can find these mummified seals. So this is a crab-eater seal, and it's probably about 1,000 years old. And basically it's been freeze-dried. So it's just turned into a freeze-dried mummy. And you can see how the snow is built up around it. So it's really a remarkable event to have snow there. And the dry valleys are, there are a number of dry valleys. There are 3 sort of in a row. And we were at Taylor Valley. That's where we went. So we cycled through everyone during the day. It was an extremely long day because we can only have people ashore for a certain amount of time. We have to make sure that they can get back. The weather was deteriorating again, and I was one of the last to come back. And when we landed, the wind speed was well over 14 knots. So that's about 75 kilometers an hour. And we certainly wouldn't start operations if the wind had been that strong. We were under huge pressure from the guests because they hadn't been able to do a lot of things up until that point. And so obviously we were sort of pushing some of the boundaries. We'd never push safety boundaries, but it meant that they only got like 20 minutes ashore to walk around, which really wasn't very much. However, even if you were on the ship, we had emperor penguins, which is also like a super mega tick, because emperor penguins, if you watch March of the March of the Penguins, these birds nest on the continent. So they nest inland, and they will have finished their breeding by the time we were there. So these are birds that have now dispersed, and really they're hanging out, feeding, coming back onto the ice floes, having a bit of a penguin conference, and just relaxing on the ice. These guys love tobogganing on their bellies. That's really the fastest way for them to move. And if you're looking at penguins, the beak will tell you a whole lot about what they eat. So your emperor penguin's got these recurved bills, quite long, and that's telling us they eat fish or squid. Whereas the other little penguins that we'll see, your Delhi penguin, your chinstrap or gentoo penguin, they've got much shorter, stouter bills, and that tells us that they eat primarily krill. One of the most fantastic things that I experienced, and I've not had this in 60 voyages down to the Antarctic, I've never experienced the whole change of sea ice going, seawater going from seawater right up to your solid ice flows. And this is the progression. So as things cool down, the air above the water is cools down very, very quickly, and it creates sort of this mist or what they call ice smoke as it starts to condense. That then turns to grease ice, where you sort of get this, it does look like grease, this sort of almost greasy layer on the top of the sea. And that then slowly turns into what they call sugar, which is a bit like a seawater smoothie. There you go. There's the sugar's starting to get thicker now, and that will start to coalesce almost into these small, almost plates of ice. But the water is moving, so they don't stay static. They bump into each other, and they start to form these round, or rather sort of almost circular structures. And this we call, funnily enough, we call pancake ice. So as pancake ice then bumps into each other some more, we start to get our ice flows starting to form. So you can see from here how the smaller little pancakes have joined together to create much bigger pancakes. And then this is when the whole ocean around you is just filled with pancake ice. And it is just actually really, really beautiful. When all your pancake ice joins together, you start to get these, the start of your ice flows. And those eventually get thicker and thicker as it gets colder and colder, and you get much thicker, harder ice flows. And there's a couple of emperor penguins coming to see what we were doing. As you can see from the ship here, there was we'd had a lot of snow as well. So the deck crew had been scraping the deck to try and get rid of the snow. Otherwise, you just go sliding. I mean, we'll have like some serious accidents going on. And here's your pack ice. So you can, I hope you can see why I absolutely love the Antarctic, because these sorts of vistas are, I want to say, life-changing. They really are. Here's the sun setting over the pack ice. That was my title slide. It was just quite magnificent. So we wanted to, our next stop was going to be Scott's Hut, but it was getting cold. And in fact, it was getting so cold that our thermometer, excuse me, our thermometer just wouldn't give us a reading. So we know that it was well below -20. And with the wind chill, it was well below -40, probably below -50. And this created a little bit of a problem for us, because the oil in the hydraulics that lowers the gangway on the one side froze. So that meant that we then only had one gangway to use, which in the end isn't the end of the world. We can deal with that. It makes it a bit difficult lifting up zodiacs. But if something happened and the other one froze, then we would certainly have some serious issues on hand. And I think our captain lost quite a lot of hair that day because they were trying to get this other gangway to work. But we made it to Cape Evans, and you can see how the ice has caked along the side of the ship. And that's the gangway we had working. You can see all the ice smoke starting to form over the sea, and this was our landing. So this was our expedition leader and two of the lecturers. I was obviously taking the photo, and you can see as we stepped into the water, the zodiacs would come. We'd have to step into the water to help people out, and when we stood back on the landing, everything just froze instantly. So you ended up having more and more ice just being caked on your boots or on your trousers until it was really, really heavy. We had to sort of chip it off. But the weather did start to clear. It was getting a bit of sun. And in the background there, that's Scott's hut. So Robert Falcon Scott, before his doomed expedition to the South Pole, that's where he and his team set up base. And that's what the Phyllis Scott really wanted to come and see. And once we landed, we took her into the hut and gave her some time just to be alone there and to sort of pay her respects. Now, this is a bird talk, so I better put some more birds in. And these are your South Polar skua. So many of you will have seen your subantarctic skua or your brown skuas. The South Polar skua looks very, very similar, except that they've got this, they're much paler on the mantle and on the belly. But the behavior is the same. They're highly aggressive, highly territorial. And I didn't take the right camera with me on this particular excursion. I just bought a wide angle lens. So these guys are busy fighting right above my head. So I just lifted my camera with a wide angle lens, took some photos. I did have to crop it a little bit, but this is the typical behavior of your South Polar skua. This is Scott's hut, and I think it's actually remarkably well constructed, considering that this was built in 1911 or 1912. As you walk into the hut, if you look to the left, you see all of this. And there's this particular smell, and I'm not sure if it's a pleasant smell or a not so pleasant smell. But these are strips of seal blubber. And obviously they've been there for 100 years now, but they've been frozen. So during the summers, it's a bit warmer. So maybe they thawed a little bit. And this is what they did was they harvested a whole, well, you can see tons and tons of seals. And that was to feed the dogs. So they hadn't finished all of the seal blubber. And so that was still sitting there. So as you walk in, you basically got this pile of seal blubber. And these are the conditions that these guys were living in. Now, it was actually reasonably well insulated, but still pretty darn cold. Now, I love this. I thought, well, of course, you're going to the Antarctic. You may as well take your racing bike. I don't think they got a whole lot of use out of it. And if you carried on, these are all stables on this side. So this is where they kept their ponies. While Amundsen knew how to use dogs and was very skilled at handling dogs, Scott did take dogs, but he also thought, well, ponies will work. Of course, ponies in the Antarctic don't really work, so he didn't have a whole lot of success with them. And as you walk to the end, to the last of the stables, there is the remains, the skeletal remains of one of the dogs that that they shot and just left it there because they couldn't take the dog with them. At the top of the hill overlooking, there's Cape Evans Hut there. There's Windvane Hill, and there's a large cross there, and that is for the members of Shackleton's Ross Sea party who perished. So everyone says, oh, Shackleton's men all made it back alive. That's not actually true. The people on the other side, I think it was 3 men, didn't survive. So we moved along now. We wanted to get to the Ross Ice Shelf. And this is when we crossed the international date line. So we basically crossed from the Eastern Hemisphere into the Western Hemisphere. And it meant that we had another day, another 4th of March. So we had the first 4th of March, and then we had the second 4th of March. So, but, you know, when you're on a trip like this, in fact, the days mean nothing. You know, it could be whatever day of the week, whatever day of the month. I always think, well, if I had a head injury and someone said to me, what day is it? I wouldn't be able to tell them. And that wouldn't necessarily be because I had a head injury, just because, you know, it doesn't matter. Every day is the same. Anyway, we crossed the date line, and this was actually really the start of part of the trip, which was extraordinarily challenging. And that's because every day subsequent to this, we lost an hour of time because we were moving across different lines of longitude. And so where every day is actually 23 hours. And so we didn't do it at night, which was quite nice, because then you didn't feel as if you were losing sleep. So at 12 o'clock every day, it would become 1 o'clock. And so we would have lunch at 12:30, and then so we'd get an announcement at 12 that half an hour we were having lunch, and then actually the time was an hour later. But it actually worked quite well, even though it is quite challenging. So we wanted to get to the Ross Ice Shelf. Unfortunately, the Ross Ice Shelf had a massive calving just before we got there, and the wind had swept huge chunks of ice across in the direction that we were going. So you can see our track. We were heading in the direction we wanted to go, and we hit ice. Now, where ice strengthened, we're not an icebreaker, but even an icebreaker can't deal with these huge icebergs. So we then had to work our way around the ice, through the ice. We were managing to go at about 2 knots, so really, really slowly. And you can see how we had to zigzag to try and get our way out of the ice field. We took 2 days to get out of the ice. The passengers were absolutely furious, even though there was nothing that anyone could have done about this. And of course, we didn't get any ice maps, but even the ice charts that we could get were a few days old, and that really doesn't help us, because ice moves incredibly fast. So we lost a full 2 days trying to figure out how to get around all of this ice. And this just gives you an idea of, we went through this massive ice field with huge icebergs, and I just love icebergs. These huge icebergs, each of them is like a sculpture, and none of them are the same. So the captain took us around a whole lot of different icebergs. I could give you a whole presentation just on pictures of icebergs taken, but the blues that come out are incredible. This one has obviously had a very small tunnel from where water had been flowing through it, which had then collapsed in on itself and created this arch. And you can see an iceberg in the distance there. And on this side, this is That's basically where water has eroded its way through the ice. So very soon that will probably go all the way through the iceberg. Now, it's always difficult to figure out how large these icebergs are when you're just looking at it from a photograph. But this iceberg's probably about 30 meters high. That will be about 10 stories. And it's probably, gosh, I don't know how many meters wide. We'd have to have a look. So quite spectacular. We did finish our little zigzag. That's where that was. And we wanted to get into the Ross Ice Shelf. And our guests were hoping that we would be able to land the helicopters there. And that's kind of what we were planning. However, all of that ice had just closed up that whole area. So we didn't manage to get anywhere close to the Ross Ice Shelf. You could see it sort of at a distance, but really you probably needed binoculars. And we saw that at about 10 o'clock at night. So it was getting sort of dusky anyway, because we're now heading later on in the season. So from there, we had to travel all the way through to Peter I Island, which is that little dot over there. And there's nothing to see in between. So this is like 8 days at sea, chugging away. And we would have 2, 3, 4 lectures a day. And this is really where people were getting really fed up. Even though the itinerary says, you're going to have a lot of days at sea, but they weren't taking into account the fact that we would lose 2 days in the ice. And those 2 days that we lost in the ice resulted in us not being able to get to the peninsula. Anyway, we bashed our way through some heavy seas. We got to Peter I Island, which is that little dot over there, and that's what we saw. So you can see the weather was pretty miserable. We couldn't see the island because there was too much fog. We couldn't lower the zodiacs because the weather was too bad. So this was the best view that our guests got of Peter I Island. There's not a lot to see anyway, but we were hoping to either make some sort of a landing or at least a helicopter scenic trip. But going to Peter I Island, by that time, and let me just go back one, that was about the 13th of March. When we left Peter I Island on the 14th of March, we started to get internet signal again. And then we heard about this craziness that was happening around the world. And we'd just been in this little bubble. It was amazing. We knew nothing about what was going on in the world. And now things changed because we thought, well, we could maybe, if the weather was good, maybe still try and sneak in a landing at the peninsula. But we had to get to Ushuaia as soon as possible. So we didn't even contemplate then going to the peninsula, this area over here, because Ushuaia, we knew was going to close. They were going to close the port. They were going to close the port on midnight of March the 18th. And so we started heading straight for Ushuaia. And once again, the weather was not playing ball. This is what it was like. We just had day after day of shocking weather. And I got sick and tired of hanging on while trying to move around the ship. And this is just a short video clip that I took from the bridge. You can see how the seas are just rolling. The flag has all but been torn off the flagpole, and we were just hammering through. So in fact, a lot of the time we just cancelled lectures because it was actually too risky to start walking around the ship. However, we do have magnificent birds in weather like that. And in the Drake Passage, coming up to the Beagle Channel, close to Ushuaia, we had our wandering albatross. And this is the bird with the longest wingspan of any bird in the world, and that's just over 3.5 meters. This is a juvenile, so he's got the dark coloring around the head and the body. And we made it to Ushuaia. And that's the end of part 1. Because we weren't allowed off in Ushuaia, they closed the port 24 hours early. So they allowed us to refuel and to reprovision and basically sent us on our way. They said, don't worry, you can disembark in Buenos Aires. There's a berth booked for you, but it will take us 6 days to get there. So we ended up having to set sail again and work our way to Montevideo. We were working our way to Buenos Aires, and when we were 3 days into our trip, we got news that Buenos Aires was closed, and we would have to find another route or another place to disembark, and that would be Montevideo. When I got that news, I thought, well, I don't think we're getting off in Montevideo, because a friend of mine on another ship, they'd been turned away from Montevideo. But that story is still to come. We left Ushuaia, and in the Beagle Channel, once you get a certain way down at the pilot station, Chile is on your would be on your right-hand side, and our pilots were Chilean. One of our concerns has been, how are we going to get these helicopters and pilots off the ship? Fortunately, we were given permission for them to leave and to land in Porto Williams. So it was a bit of a bittersweet moment, because we'd become very, very closely attached to these guys. They were the sweetest bunch. So we had to wave them goodbye. But we were also very relieved that they could get home. Then on our way up to Montevideo, we went through an area called the City of Lights. And this is what it looks like. This was taken with my cell phone. This is 200 nautical miles away from the coast of Argentina. And this is all of the squid fishing boats, the squid jiggers, that are largely illegal because they're just outside of the exclusive economic zone of Argentina. And they have about 300 kilowatts of light per boat, and it extends for hundreds of kilometers. That's what they look like. And they're busy fishing for your Argentine short fin squid. Now, if you're looking from space, you can actually see all of these lights right along the EEZ, and the Argentine Navy try and protect this area, but these pirate vessels just go on the outside, and you can see they're not particularly, don't look particularly seaworthy, and they catch between 1 and 2 million tons a year of the squid. It's quite an incredible sight to see. Anyway, we carried on towards Montevideo, and I'm going to go back. I said 15th of March, sorry, that should be the 25th of March. We get to Montevideo, and work has been done with all the different embassies, and we managed to get our guests off the ship. I should have come home as well. I was due to fly to Sao Paulo, Addis Ababa, South Africa, but I would have arrived home on the 27th of March, which was, of course, when lockdown started. So I couldn't come home. I had to stay on the ship for the repositioning for a month, all the way across the Atlantic to the Netherlands. And we had to really make do with what we could. So along the way, we had a guy called Simon who stood on the bridge for 9 or 10 hours every day looking for wildlife. And We spotted, while up there, he spotted a green sea turtle, which is something, I mean, they're there, obviously, but you never see them. And this little guy's got a barnacle on his back. So he was just coming up to breathe a little bit. So I'm trying to get the... We had some yellow-nosed albatross. This was still while we were quite far south. And we came across a huge flock of Wilson storm petrels. And these little guys are very common around the world. And a flock like this tells us that something has been killed there, because they will eat sort of small, well, there was a sort of greasy layer on the water, and they will pick up pieces of dead material floating around, as well as eating sort of small zooplankton. So we were working our way further north, and what did we come across? Another really terrible photo, but we had an eared dove. Maybe let me go back a bit. That's where we were when we had an eared dove coming past the ship. I mean, we were well out of it, probably about 200 kilometers out to sea. So, yeah, we don't know why these birds come so far out. But then we had a cattle egret, but not just one cattle egret. We had a whole flock of cattle egrets coming out to see us, hundreds of kilometers out to sea. They're not seabirds. They can't land. They can't take off from water. They can't swim. And they flew around us, and then they flew away. So goodness knows what they were doing. Anyway, we started to have a bit of a routine, and that is that a few of us would get together in the evenings and watch the sunsets, because the sunsets out at sea were quite magnificent. But also now my hair was starting to grow and actually just being quite ridiculously long, and there was nothing I could do about it. So I thought, okay, well, I'm at sea. I'll do a different hairstyle every day. Let's see what I can do. And for those of you who don't know, this is Duncan. It was still pretty chilly, so he's wearing his jumper. And of course, he's got to wear a life jacket because he is out at sea. We don't want to lose him at sea. So I would come up with different ideas of how I was going to do my hair. This is the dog sticking their head out of the window on a moving car portrayal. Duncan's ears are really being blown back, so you can get an idea of the wind. And we went through an area where we had a lot of flying fish. So I thought, okay, well, this is a good photographic challenge. But I've got to tell you, it's really difficult, really, really difficult, because these fish fly out of the water and pretty much land before you've even got sight of them. So then the next challenge was, we had, every now and again, we'd have boobies coming down, chasing the fish. And it was quite remarkable to see. You can see that this boobie's wing actually was cutting through the water while he was chasing after this fish. So these are your red-footed boobies. They've got just beautiful faces. You can't see his red feet. They sort of tuck them in. But they have two color morphs. So they are either sort of a complete brown, or they're white and black like we see here. However, I did get to see one of them catching a flying fish and lifting it up. And you can actually see the entrails of the fish being squeezed out as he's grabbed it. And how he has to manhandle this fish. And he didn't let go. He did get a proper grip on it, and then he landed on the water and swallowed the fish whole. We had dolphins at almost every day, but they didn't hang around long. So if we weren't on the bridge, Simon would call us on the radio and say, dolphins, and we'd grab our cameras and we'd go rushing out to the bow. And it wasn't the best bow for us to take photos of the dolphins bow riding, but we did see quite a few different species. One of the highlights of the crossing, though, was coming across a pod of sperm whale. Now, sperm whales are remarkable animals. They can dive down to 2 kilometers. They're toothed whales, so they're a bit like dolphins, and they have this humongous square head, which houses what they call the melon. And they send, so when they do the echolocation, they send this sound wave out. The melon acts as a lens and sort of amplifies it, and the signal will come back, and they'll pick up the signal in the jaw. So from that signal, they'll be able to tell where the food is, how big it is, how fast it's moving, which direction it's going. And their favorite food is the, sorry, just give me one sec. Their favorite food is your giant squid. So they, and that's of course what they find at such great depths. So they'll normally dive down for well over an hour, and then they need to come up to the surface and blow off all of that carbon dioxide. So they only stay at the surface for about 15 minutes before diving again. So to see a pod of them is quite something that very few people see. But more than that, they were giving us an incredible display. So they were fluking. We had one breaching. I didn't catch the whole breach, but he's literally jumped out of the water, and this is him landing. And you can see this one over here busy spy hopping. So he's stuck his head out of the water to probably to see what we're up to. So we had a really cool captain, and even though we were on our way somewhere, he slowed the ship right down, and we circled around them, and so we got a really, really good view. Anyway, this was our next sunset, and we had, oh man, we had just beautiful sunsets. On the 8th of April, there was the full moon, and it started out as this pink color, and as it started to rise, so it went to orange, and then our regular moon color. And out at sea, of course, you've got no external lights, you've got no light pollution, so you get a very, very clear view. So these are just some of the sunset shots. So of course, as days go on, so my hair is getting more and more out of control, and just with the wind blowing through my hair, I don't think it quite looks quite as bad as that guy. But I then sent out a notice to my friends to send me pictures of hairstyles, and I would see what I could do. Anyway, we hit the equator, or we crossed the equator rather, and that's McDonald, and that's Duncan. Duncan's crossed the equator before, but McDonald hadn't. So this is as we crossed the equator. It was a very exciting event. And if you've never crossed the equator by sea before, then you have to go through this whole initiation. So King Neptune comes on board, and there are a whole lot of really horrible things that they do to people. Fortunately, I've crossed the equator before, so I didn't have any. I didn't have to do it again. Thank goodness. We had our pan-tropical spotted dolphin on the 12th of April. He was quite far away from the ship, but I managed to get him. Now, when you're crossing the Atlantic, you're not seeing a whole lot of wildlife. Your birds don't hang around there because the food is not easy to come by. They'll stay more along the edges of the land. So every day we'd see maybe one bird. So this might look like we're seeing a lot of birds. We're not. This was the bird of the day, the red-billed tropic bird. We had a lot of red